The morning began like any other, sunlight spilling through the blinds, birds chirping lazily outside, and the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen. I stepped onto my porch with a steaming mug in hand, ready to enjoy a peaceful Saturday. But instead of serenity, my eyes landed on something out of place. A crisp white envelope was taped firmly to my front door. I frowned. Around here, that usually meant trouble. The Homeowners Association had a reputation for policing everything from mailbox paint to the length of grass blades. They lived for rulebooks and regulations, and apparently, today, they had set their sights on me. Peeling the envelope free, I recognized the HOA's bold, self-important letterhead at the top. I sighed and tore it open, half expecting the usual nonsense. But as I scanned the neatly typed words, my brows furrowed deeper and deeper. Dear homeowner, your boat has been observed causing excessive ripples on the lake, disturbing the community's aesthetic and peace. Please remove it within 72 hours to avoid fines. Ripples. They were serious. I read it again, slower this time, trying to process the absurdity. My boat wasn't some roaring motor yacht. It was a modest, weathered fishing boat, docked neatly at the small pier behind my house. I rarely even took it out, maybe once or twice a week. The idea that it was a threat to the aesthetic of the lake was laughable. For a moment, I just stood there on the porch, wall letter in one hand, coffee mug in the other, caught between disbelief and irritation. I imagined the board members sitting around their polished conference table, nodding solemnly as they declared that my boat's ripples were destroying neighborhood peace. It was so ridiculous that I almost laughed, almost. Then the irritation hardened into something else. The audacity of it all. Because here's the thing. The lake wasn't theirs to regulate. It wasn't common property. It wasn't some shared amenity listed in their bylaws. The lake was mine. My deed spelled it out in black and white. When I bought this property years ago, I didn't just purchase the house and land. I purchased the lake itself. And yet, here was the HOA, puffing out its chest and trying to order me around like some tenant trespassing on their water. I walked inside, spread the letter flat on the kitchen counter, and pulled open the file drawer where I kept all my property documents. Sure enough, there it was, my deed, clear as day, with the lake boundaries outlined and stamped. I ran a finger over the words, a slow smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. They had no idea. To them, I was just another homeowner subject to their ever-expanding rules. But the reality was quite different. They were trespassers, every time they dipped a fishing pole into the water or launched a kayak from my shoreline. And now, they'd made the mistake of putting their demands in writing. I folded the HOA notice carefully and slid it into a folder labeled evidence. This was going to be interesting. The community center's conference room smelled faintly of old coffee and carpet cleaner. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting their sterile glow on a long rectangular table where the HOA board sat in a neat little row. Clipboards, pens, and neatly stacked papers lay before them like weapons in an arsenal. I slipped into a chair at the back of the room, drawing a few curious glances from neighbors who had gathered to witness whatever tonight's drama would be. The HOA always drew a crowd, mostly out of morbid curiosity. "All right, let's call this meeting to order," declared Mrs. Whitmore, the HOA president, her voice sharp and commanding. She was a tall, stiff woman in her late 60s who treated every minor issue like a Supreme Court trial. Her pearl necklace clinked faintly as she adjusted her glasses and scanned the room. They went through the usual motions first. Landscaping complaints, a reminder about trash bins, a dispute over mailbox colors. The room buzzed with polite boredom, until Mrs. Whitmore cleared her throat. "Next, we need to discuss the matter of Mr. Dawson's boat." Her gaze flicked toward me, cool and disapproving. "As stated in the notice, the vessel has been causing disruptive ripples across the lake. We've had multiple complaints that it disturbs the neighborhood's tranquility. The board has voted to request its removal." A murmur rippled through the audience, neighbors craning their necks to get a look at me. Some frowned, others smirked, clearly enjoying the show. I let the silence stretch a moment before standing. "May I respond?" Mrs. Whitmore folded her hands primly. Briefly, I walked to the front, pulling a folder from under my arm. My footsteps echoed against the tile floor. Laying the folder on the table, I slid a set of papers across to her. "This," I said evenly, "is the deed to my property. As you'll see, the lake is privately owned, by me. Not by the HOA, not by the community, by me. The room went still. Mrs. Whitmore blinked, clearly unprepared for that response. She adjusted her glasses and peered at the paperwork, her lips tightening. "That can't be correct," she said, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "Oh, it's correct," I said. "The lake was included in the original purchase, and the deed records confirm it. Which means your notice was not only baseless, it was an attempt to enforce authority you don't have." A man from the board, Mr. Langford, leaned forward, squinting at the document. "So you're saying we can't regulate what happens on the lake?" "Exactly," I replied. "And furthermore, every time one of you has used the lake without my permission, you've been trespassing on private property. Fishing, boating, swimming, it all falls under my ownership rights." Gasps echoed around the room. A couple of neighbors whispered to each other, eyes wide. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed crimson as she shuffled the papers with trembling hands. "This is highly irregular," she snapped. "We'll have to consult our legal team." "You do that," I said calmly, retrieving my papers and tucking them back into the folder. "But until then, I suggest you stop sending me notices about what I do with my own property. Because next time, I won't just laugh it off, I'll start issuing fines of my own." A stunned hush fell over the room. For the first time, the mighty HOA board looked small, powerless, and utterly cornered. And it felt good. The first letter came 3 days later, slid under my door like a passive-aggressive calling card. "Despite your claims of ownership," it read, "the HOA will continue to regulate community standards. Failure to comply with removal of your boat will result in fines and possible legal action." I laughed out loud. They hadn't learned a thing. I sat down at my desk, pulled out my stationery, and drafted a certified letter in response. It was short, sharp, and backed with legal weight. I enclosed a copy of the deed. Again, and added something new, a formal notice of trespass. "Any further unauthorized use of my lake," I stated, "would be considered a violation of property rights, subject to civil penalties." I mailed it, then leaned back in my chair, curious how long it would take before panic set in. The answer came quickly. Within a week, families that once flocked to the water vanished. No kids splashing along the shore. No retirees casting fishing lines at dawn. The pier down the way, usually buzzing with kayaks, sat abandoned. Word had gotten around. The HOA had no authority here. But the board wasn't ready to surrender. They doubled down, sending more notices, each one more desperate than the last. The language grew bold, even hostile. Claims of neighborhood disruption, threats of escalating fines, vague mentions of attorneys. Each letter went straight into my growing evidence folder. Meanwhile, whispers spread through the neighborhood. Some folks started avoiding me altogether, as if I'd become radioactive. Others, the quiet types who'd always resented the HOA's nitpicking, gave me subtle nods of approval when I passed. One even muttered, "Good for you," under his breath as I walked by. Then came the breaking point. A flyer appeared in everyone's mailbox, glossy and cheerful, Community Lake Day. Sponsored by the HOA, barbecues, music, swimming, boating, right on my shoreline. The arrogance was stunning. They had ignored my trespass notice, ignored the deed, and were now planning a full-scale event on my private property. I didn't waste time. The morning of the event, I called the county sheriff's office and explained the situation. They sent 2 deputies, who arrived just as the HOA was setting up tents and folding chairs. I watched from my porch, sipping coffee, as the officers strode over to the president. Mrs. Whitmore's face turned a spectacular shade of red as the deputies calmly explained the reality: the lake wasn't HOA property. The deed was valid. She and the board had no authority here. If they continued with the event, they could be cited for trespassing. The crowd, once festive, dissolved almost instantly. Neighbors folded their lawn chairs, muttering under their breath. A few shot me glares, but most looked embarrassed, fooled by their own board. Mrs. Whitmore packed up her clipboard and stormed off, pearl necklace bouncing furiously against her chest. The sight of her being escorted off my property was worth every ounce of trouble. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the lake shimmered golden, I sat on my dock with a fishing rod in hand. The water was calm, quiet, mine. And for the first time in weeks, I felt truly at peace. The WA must have thought their persistence would wear me down. Letter after letter, threat after threat, they kept trying to intimidate me. But every envelope they dropped in my mailbox only strengthened my case. When they ignored my trespass invoices, I filed in small claims court. It wasn't about the money, though I wasn't about to turn it down. It was about principle. They had tried to bully me, and now they were going to learn what real authority looked like. Court day arrived on a brisk Thursday morning. The small courtroom buzzed with quiet chatter as neighbors filled the benches, eager for drama. Word had spread, and this showdown had become the talk of the community. On one side sat Mrs. Whitmore, the WA president, flanked by two nervous board members. On the other, me, with a neatly organized binder full of evidence and a calm smile. When the judge entered, the room hushed. After formalities, Mrs. Whitmore launched into her argument, her voice sharp and trembling with rehearsed indignation. Your Honor, the defendant's boat has been disruptive to the community, violating our standards and disturbing the peace. The WA has full authority to regulate use of shared amenities, and... The judge raised a hand. Shared amenities. Yes, she replied quickly, the lake. I leaned forward. With respect, Your Honor, the lake is not a shared amenity. It is my private property. I stood, walked to the bench, and handed over the deed. As you'll see, the lake is explicitly included in my parcel. The WA has no jurisdiction over it. Yet they have repeatedly issued notices, attempted to fine me, and even organized events on my property without permission. This isn't about ripples, it's about trespass and harassment. The judge studied the deed for a long moment, flipping pages. Then he looked over his glasses at Mrs. Whitmore. Do you have any evidence contradicting this deed? Silence. Mrs. Whitmore's lips pressed thin. One board member fidgeted with his tie, the other stared at the floor. I didn't think so, the judge said dryly. He turned back to me. You were correct, sir. The lake is private property. The WA overstepped its authority. Their notices were invalid, and their use of your lake constitutes trespass. Gasps filled the courtroom. I caught the faintest smile on a few neighbors' faces, those who'd secretly hoped someone would finally put the WA in its place. The judge continued, I'm awarding damages to the plaintiff for repeated trespass and harassment. The WA is to cease all claims over the lake effective immediately. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. Case closed. Mrs. Whitmore gathered her papers with trembling hands, her face pale. The board members shuffled out like scolded children. As I walked out into the cool air, I felt lighter than I had in months. Victory wasn't just sweet, it was poetic. Back home, I strolled down to my dock, climbed into my boat, and pushed off. The water rippled gently around me, golden in the late afternoon sun. The WA had tried to fine me for ripples. Instead, I'd fined them for trespass. And as I cast my fishing line into the lake, I couldn't help but chuckle. The boat wasn't going anywhere.